like maybe we understand the limits of perfection because it's so ingrained in us to be obsessed with it or something. I mean, I know I would definitely describe myself as a recovering perfectionist. Like I've taken that.
Interesting.
I'll criticize like the way my husband does like one thing, and he'll
Mhm.
get like very offended by it. And in my head, I'm like, you don't know how many things I have already held back on. Like how many things I have not said that I have wanted to say so bad.
The Big Hormone Enneagram.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres 4 with 5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9 with 1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe us on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
Welcome to Big Hormone Enneagram, the only anti-Harry Potter 9/11 truther Enneagram podcast there is. We're doing type 1 today, and we're here with our special guests, Jamie and Mary. And I'm going to say a little bit about 1, and then I'd like y'all to introduce yourselves, if you would please. So generally speaking, 1 represents the sort of the integrity and purposefulness and alignment that we find when we're really present in the body. And healthy 1s have a sort of a natural wisdom and discernment for how to live into the best possibility. And that can be morally, it can be aesthetically. But there's always this view of like the highest or most good or most sacred form of something. And so when 1s are healthy, they generally have an eye towards that possibility or that sensibility, but they also have mercy for how things just actually are, how things are messy. But when they become more stressed out and overwhelmed, and they can start feeling like they're the only responsible person or the only one that gives a shit, they start judging themselves and other people for not living up to those ideals. And so in this series, we've been doing these interviews with people of different types and really trying to get into the guts of the types and get to the heart, not just like so that people like, oh, I know what a 1 is now, but like can really understand and empathize and feel the 1 in them and what that is, and humanize all the types. So yeah, if Mary or Jamie, if you want to take it away.
I'm Mary. I am a 1 with a 9. I'm self-pres sexual tri-type 146.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I am a 1 with a 2 wing. I am sexual self-pres and a 173 tri-type.
All right. Oh, do you want to tell them about what you do, if you want people to find you, that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. I'm an opera singer. You can find me at marycloudmezzo.com because I'm a mezzo soprano.
How do you spell mezzo?
Mezzo, like
All right.
Italian for middle.
I am a fashion designer, and the name of my line is Production Mode, and you can find that at www.productionmodechicago.com.
You got to tell people that you're a DJ too.
Yeah.
It's an important detail.
I am also a DJ, and you can find that on Mixcloud at Miss Haze, MISSHAZE.
The world's only type 1 DJ.
Seriously.
Very important.
These are the most efficient intros we have ever had, just in case you were wondering.
So proud.
Yeah, you should be.
It's the one thing.
Jamie's collage was the first collage reading that kick-started the whole thing.
The sacred
so
prime
cool.
Collage. Yes, she was the first.
The number 1.
Mary, do you know the collage things that
I have? Yeah, like I've looked at them, and like, are they all from the cards that you buy, or like?
No.
No.
Like,
I kind of don't understand.
Well, David, 2014, he designed 6 cards to embody what each of the stackings, what that energy is.
Okay.
And the idea was that if you looked at the 6 cards, that your own sort of reaction to each card would point to what your stacking was.
Sure.
And so when I was seeing Jamie, I showed her one of the card deck. And she didn't like any of them at all. She was like super shitting on every, like she was like, "Oh, these are terrible, like terrible artwork." And
Sounds like me. I had aesthetic issues.
we might have a 1 here.
I know. I was like so relate to that. Actually.
She was like, "These are horrible." So I was like, "Okay, let's make a collage that you like." And so we ended up doing making a collage that she liked. Put it together and everything. And I sent it off to David, not telling him who it was, just like, "Hey, what do you see here?" And he spat out like a paragraph of his magical David,
Wow.
philosopher of the universe kind of thing. And I read it to her, and it was like kind of a really eerie, totally read her mail and pointed out like the type 1 rigidity versus the looseness of the sexual drive. And so that was like, holy shit, you can actually pick up a lot of people's stuff from a collage that they put together, especially the instinctual stacking. And so that began the whole thing.
Oh wow.
David had attributed like different elements to the
Yes.
instincts, and like
Yes.
the Bhava chakra at the center has these 3 poisons that are pig, snake, and a rooster, and they represent ignorance and attachment and aversion that he dissociated with the instincts as well. So it was sort of like it had its own inner logic. It wasn't just like, here's the collage.
Yeah. Here's lots of images.
Look at this picture I made.
Isn't it pretty?
Put it on your refrigerator.
That's what I like thought at first when I was seeing them, and I was like very confused. But then I like
This has
looked
just been
more
years
into
of us trying to include David as a very special person. My collage, cool, David.
Good job.
We're just trying to fit him in somewhere.
Somewhere.
Mary has a big old 9-wing.
I do. I'm a very 91, definitely.
I'm curious because I don't necessarily understand. I don't know how. I guess this is just like a more chill 9. Is that what the fuck does a 9-wing on a 1 look like, or what is your experience?
It does look confusing, I think, because sometimes I feel like I get like the sort of like 1 productivity thing going, and I can like see that and objectivity, and then like the 9 sort of just like disperses everything and like kind of like, so yeah, chills it out, but like in a frustrating way to me sometimes. But
Okay.
yeah, and also you can like, I think perhaps I'm not as rigid as some ones, or like quite as judgmental. That might
Okay.
not be totally true. That might not be.
Yeah,
For you.
Well,
Judgmental.
like my experience of Mary is that she's a little bit more philosophical, and like the sort of the judgment or whatever comes from a sort of a, like, Mary really represents like an ideal, like going to the
Okay.
ideal place
Yeah.
and critiquing from an ideal, and it's not very like procedural or like, oh, you're not doing it right, like someone's. It's like really this like sense of goodness and aesthetic rightness and sacredness that I think is like really there. And then plus her mom is like the world's biggest 9,
Yes,
Oh, okay.
Yes.
99.
the most
It's so true.
chaotic 9 of the 9s, and so I think there's some rub there, but
Yeah.
David, what's your experience of ones that have a 9-wing versus the 1 versus with 2-wing?
Well, it's kind of what John was alluding to. It's more abstract and sort of separate. It's almost in a way quasi 5-ish, although that's not maybe not a helpful way to talk about it. But it can be kind of separate in ideal space, if that makes sense, right? So
And-
that makes it kind of 5-ish. Whereas 1 with a 2 is much more kind of involved with people and kind
Yeah.
of is more opinionated about how people around them should be living their lives or something, that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that was the sense I got from Jamie. Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're involved in with the fashion industry in terms of the ethics of how fashion is made,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you do a lot of what do you call that? That you've spoken at some events that were advocating for more.
Yeah, anti-sweatshop work, or
Yes,
it could be
yeah.
slow
Mhm.
fashion, fair trade, falls into a lot of categories. But
Yeah.
I'm probably more on the 2 end. Yeah.
Because
That's
like for
funny.
social last to get out there and just be like on the front
That-
lines for a movement like that, that's not. That's
Yeah.
probably more involved.
So what about like a one wing two with the social and the stacking? What would that look like?
Hillary Clinton.
I think
Okay,
Hillary.
maybe not using.
I know,
Clinton's
John.
I think Hillary Clinton's a 3.
Yeah,
but,
I know.
You know, Bernard is a.
Oh man, all right.
Yeah, Bernie's a good example.
That's a good
of
example.
one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit more philanthropic, or
More hands-on with the people, whereas one with a 9 is more philosophical.
Like Noam
Mhm.
Chomsky is
There you
like
go.
an old, you know, like one with a 9
There
comparison
you go.
to Bernie with an old one with a 2. It's like Noam Chomsky takes 30 years to say, a sentence, but he's, very like he's got more like the 5 flavor that David's speaking to also.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting. I'm married to a 5. And so like I feel like I do relate to him on kind of that level that you were talking about.
Mm.
So one thing I was interested in when thinking about, this call, like you guys, I don't really know you, Jamie, but I know Mary very well. Mary is the one who ruined my life by telling me about the Enneagram
Mm.
and told me I was a 4 on that camping trip.
Yep.
And you're actually in the intro of my book, Mary,
Oh, wow.
destroying my life. But I think that generally speaking, when people hear about ones or when they hear about the struggle of ones with rigidity and ideals and things like that, generally speaking, it conjures like kind of a caricature and of like a librarian, sexually repressed librarian or something. And so I was curious, like how you experience the stereotypes versus how you see it showing up in a way that's not just this cut and dry, like anal retentive sense, but like what do you feel is like what I get the sense of with one is there's always a sense of preserving or maintaining or bringing something to a new level. And so I wanted to speak one of y'all, if both of y'all could speak to if that resonates and how that shows up for y'all.
Man, yeah. So you said that one of the big stereotypes being rigidity. That's one that I have never like really identified with. I mean, I get it a little bit because like I guess I have high standards or whatever, but I've never been like surprised or like overly distraught if like those standards aren't met. I feel like I'm a little bit more flexible than that. But I do, on the other hand, relate to sort of if I like have to let too much of that go, like a frustration with that. I don't know, Jamie, what do you want to say?
I totally relate to what you're saying.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I'm a rigid person. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment where there was a ton of rigidity and I hated it. So, I mean, I definitely ran screaming from that. I would say to the librarian point, I think people definitely perceive me that way, but I also have a sexual instinct, which I know doesn't mean that I'm a promiscuous person. That's not what that is about. But I definitely, and like you said in your intro, in tune with my body and present with my body. So I don't have that intellectual disconnect from the sensual by any means. And I think it's, not surprising that both of us are in aesthetic fields,
Yes.
fields where you really have to, where taste is important, but also physicality, sensuality, pleasure.
Mhm.
People
Definitely.
don't go to the opera to enjoy themselves.
No. Yeah.
So you're a sexy
would.
librarian.
Yeah, I think
that's more accurate.
We just got to take the bun out and take the glasses off and then watch out.
Because really, isn't that what everyone's talking about when they're talking about the librarian?
Yeah, totally.
They just unbutton the
Cosplay.
top button, all of a sudden they're sexy.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do the librarian.
So I think that's a really interesting point, Jamie and Mary, that like a lot of where your energy goes to is towards aesthetics. And again, like another stereotype that I often run across with ones is thinking that they're not creative people. And so like we 4s get that reputation. So I was just wondering how you feel like what like from the point of view of oneishness and it's if you could speak to how oneishness and aesthetics come together.
And I do think there's a sense of, for somebody with a design perspective, like if you think about design thinking, you're problem solving, you are making some sense out of the chaos. You're ordering the world. I mean, even I partly became a designer because I would, go to buy shoes or clothes or whatever, and I wouldn't see what I would like. And I always thought, well, I could improve this. So it's this sense of maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's arrogance, but there's a sense,
Maybe.
just a tiny bit, just a smidge. But you have this sense of wanting to make things better and improve on things. That said, in speaking to the rigidity question, like I'm a pretty messy person, but I am able to get things done, make things happen. Like I'm also very productive. So I don't know if that's
Okay.
typical
Yeah,
of one.
what
But
I'll make a quick comment, because when she says she's a pretty messy person, and there's one time I came over to her apartment and she was like, "Oh, this place is so messy," and I kid you not, it was still fucking pristine, clean as shit. Like there were a couple crumbs maybe here and there, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so messy."
I got 4 empty cups on my desk right now.
So just to be clear, when she says messy, it's not your messy.
Well, I was
The
gonna
men's
say,
definition.
people experience themselves in their own viewpoint. So often ones don't view themselves as rigid and super
Yeah,
organized because that's just their way of viewing the world all the time.
The water
totally.
you're swimming in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The water you're
Yeah.
swimming in, you can't really
Yeah.
tell.
I really relate to what you said about as far as like aesthetics and like being artistic, like creating order out of chaos, sort of. So one of the things that drew me the most to opera is the rehearsal process, because that's like the majority of the work. And so when you go to a rehearsal, you have to deal with all these different personalities, and in opera they are often from like all over the world. You have the director, you have the music director, you have the entire orchestra. So like it seems like this should be chaos, but it ends up not being at all, and it ends up working like hundreds of people sort of in harmony. And to me that is how I feel, the sort of like making order out of chaos.
So what's interesting to me though is that, a lot of the emphasis, at least in how one is taught and described generally,
Mhm.
is about improving things, but in
Mm.
a practical or useful or functional sense. But like, the aesthetic isn't practical
Right.
and it's not useful. And I mean, that's part of its gift. And beauty, it's an orientation to chaos in a certain way. That there's a kind of an intimacy with it that's not just random. And so I'm wondering if either of y'all could speak to that, with like the relationship of beauty and what beauty represents. Because I mean, speaking for myself, it's like we live in a hugely broken, ugly, disgusting, dysfunctional, corrupt, sickening, cancer
Yeah,
world.
we get it, John.
And and I think that as a 4 versus that 1, like even though we have a line, like we probably have different perspectives on beauty, but I think for both of our types, it's like a really central feature.
Yeah. Like, so what you're asking is like sort of beauty's place in the world. Like, why do I go to like beauty slash aesthetic?
Yeah, like
As
why aren't you like volunteering at like an animal
Yeah.
shelter?
Okay, I got you. So uh,
You should do that, by the way, Mary.
Yeah, why aren't you better?
You could be doing so much more.
so
much
more to do.
improvement
This is
potential.
stop it, you guys. I talk about this all the time.
All right, everybody shut up.
So I was saying that like sort of the one like ego on my shoulder, like kind of always ask myself that, like I'm like, shouldn't I just like be a nurse or something? Like I would always be useful. But I don't know. I think ultimately it's super vague, but it has to do with like human connection, which I like value. Like I value that like more than most things, and like connection through like storytelling though. So through I guess like archetypes maybe.
I think for me, kind of hearing that description of beauty as, orientation of chaos, I mean, it made me think of nature and just how nature has beauty and so much imperfection, and that it makes order out of a chaos. But there's also that, like, for something to truly be beautiful, often it has to be irregular or unique or surprising, or improvisational. And all those things are what attract me to beauty. And I guess also even just that it's something that it defies logic, it defies order and perfection. It's like you can't program beauty. It doesn't
Mhm.
work like that.
It almost sounds like when you guys are describing beauty, it like goes away from this perfection oneness. Like I don't know what that is.
Well,
That's just
Yeah,
really interesting.
maybe we understand the limits of perfection because it's so
Mm.
ingrained in us to be obsessed with it or something. I mean, I know I would definitely describe myself as a recovering perfectionist. Like I've taken
Ooh,
that.
Interesting.
Yeah,
why would you
I've
say
taken that.
recovering?
um, because it doesn't bring happiness. It just makes you feel bad, and it can riddle you with indecision. It can make the people around you feel bad. So it's just like, just try to be good enough, do your best.
Uh-huh.
And
what
then
what
also perfectionism is boring. Like people who are perfectionists are too
Yeah,
rigid.
perfectionism sucks.
Jamie, in response to what you're saying about a relationship of like kind of including a certain kind of chaos in working with it, it makes me think of like almost like homeopathy or like
Mm-hmm.
a ritual where like you kind of
Mhm.
put the energy of something into you in a certain way to have a relationship with it rather than expelling it or something, like creating a little bit of a ritual that it's not a control, but it's a way to meet it in a kind of to have that encounter, like with
Mhm.
something that is beyond like your control, like chaos or whatever. Does that sound right?
Well, totally. And I think it's also somewhat about embracing the mystery and realizing that as a human being, there's only so much order you can create, only so much control you can have over things.
Mhm.
And at some point, you have to give yourself up to not knowing what's going to happen next or something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I really relate to that, what you said about embracing the mystery. Like that is kind of like always what I've been interested in, like in different ways in my whole life. So yeah, like that's always sort of been the goal. And for some reason I feel like art is the only thing that like takes me closest to that feeling.
True. And like with great art, you can never completely dissect it or understand why it's so great. You can't just,
Yeah.
there's something ineffable about it always.
So for like younger ones that are listening to this, are people who are newer to understanding their oneness. Did you always have this kind of relationship with chaos, or was this kind of as you learned about yourself and as you learned about your uh, perfectionism, for lack of a better word, did you kind of create this relationship with chaos?
Like I said, I'm a recovering perfectionist, but um,
Mm.
yeah, I think that comes with probably maturity for a lot of people, though I don't know if that's specific for one. It's hard to say. But growing up in a super rigid environment, like I said, I realized how toxic that was for me. That there were all these rules, and you were never good enough, and you always had to feel bad about yourself. You're always judging someone else, or your position in the higher. It was super hierarchical, and so your position was determined on like how much better you were than other people.
Mm.
And I just saw how miserable everybody was in that world. So I don't know if I was in some ways lucky to kind of see something like taken to its extreme in order to realize that it's not a very helpful psychological orientation. And
Yeah.
it's also pretty boring. Like perfectionism is boring. Like it's not rigidity is boring. It's not beautiful.
Based on what you guys have been saying, it feels like art and aesthetics represent some kind of a really like a high ideal. Like
Mhm.
it's almost like, of course ones are like perfection is boring, but there's an ideal in aesthetics and art.
I think it's like a solution is one way to say it.
So it's not
Mhm.
so much a perfection as it is a solution or an ideal.
It's an
I'm not
integration.
sure. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and maybe it's trying to perfect things as much as you can, but realize that, if you're maybe kind of have a healthier sense of self or you had time to figure out your oneness, that you realize that that's an ideal you can never quite reach, or that you have to leave room for mess or chaos within all of
Mm.
that in order to actually have things be vibrant and not be too locked in.
Mm, interesting.
Jamie, do you have a piece of art or music or performance or anything, any aesthetic experience that is like you consider to be a favorite or a particularly moving representation of a certain idealism that you strive for?
I'm so terrible at those questions always of like, what is my favorite, whatever. Like my mind just goes blank. So I have to think about it for a little while. But I would say like, even though I don't work in this medium, that my life often takes me back to dance and watching people perform dance. I think there's just something about that is so beautiful and so transcendent.
The body center beautified,
Yeah.
right, into an ideal.
Yeah, I can relate to that as a body type. Just I really appreciate any sort of movement arts of all kinds. Just even like martial arts, just when you can bring together a set of movements and it comes together into a really complicated sequence of body expressions. I think that's really cool. Well, it does something for me for sure.
Jamie, being a one, you dated Emeka, right?
Yes.
So was it that Emeka was chaos that you were attracted to, or was that he's a broken man that you needed to fix?
We ended up meeting because of Prince, but let me let her answer. I'm not gonna drown her out.
Oh God.
I don't see Emeka as broken or particularly chaotic, but I think we only dated for a couple months, so
It was only a couple months, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a super intense, thing. So
Well,
maybe I didn't get to know him the way that you all know him.
Well, you definitely. In terms of chaos, there was a point where I kept sending her these images that I liked, and she was like, "What the fuck are you?" Just like her reaction to some of these images.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you
this was
forgot
like 4
that.
years ago too. Yeah. I was like, those are grossing me out. Like, I don't ruin whatever idea I have of you. Like I don't want to know. Like, don't uncover too much of your brain.
So once my collages, I think once she saw my collages, she was like, what are you, a warlock or something?"
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't think she was into that. She was not into that.
Kind of, there was a lot of attraction to the grotesque in the collages. I remember, just like monsters and deformity.
Keeping the chaos chaotic instead of necessarily refined and beautiful.
Yeah, for sure.
The way me and Jamie met, we met because the night that Prince died, she was DJing at Danny's, which some of you guys have been to.
Respect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so me and OD ended up there, and we ended up all dancing, and at some point we all kept hanging out. And I went to Jamie's birthday party at the same place, Danny's, and that was the night that we ended up started hooking up.
Also, I don't know if you remember this, Emeka, but my brother was super ill. Like I got the news either the night of my birthday party or the day before or something, and he was.
Oh, you never told me this. Or maybe you did and I forgot. Sorry.
I don't know. I don't remember either. I definitely wouldn't have told you that night. I don't know if I told you afterwards, but he was in very critical condition, and so I knew that the next morning I was going to drive back to St. Louis, and so I was in this very kind of like, you only got one life.
Live it up.
Trying to explain why she chose me.
Yeah, who's this freak? Okay.
I've got one life. Okay, Emeka. All right, fine, cool. All
I
right.
didn't mean it like that at all.
Sure. Okay. It's my last night on Earth, probably. So we could do this. No, I don't think I remember that.
Not at all what I meant. No, it was just an intense moment for me for sure. But I probably didn't want to like bore you with all the details when I didn't know you well,
I would have probably been into all those details.
Yeah, I was gonna say Emeka would have gone there with you.
Yeah.
Tell me all the details.
Tell me all your dark secrets.
I want to know.
I kind of have a question for all. I mean, I know that introvert extrovert isn't how Enneagram operates. It's more in depth and nuanced than that. But I do find that it seems friends of mine who identify as extroverted are doing better in this COVID situation than my friends who typically identify as introvert. And I don't know, my only theory about that is that those of us who identify as extroverts understand how much we need people and have found workarounds to continuing to socialize, and maybe those who are introverted don't have as many tools in their toolkit for figuring out how to get those interactions that they need as well, even if they're much more minimal. I don't know. Does that do anything for you, Enneagrammers? Does that?
Jamie, we ask the questions here, okay?
Yeah, you need to step back.
No, I'm kidding.
Is that a one trait? Probably.
No, actually, I love that you ask questions.
Yeah.
I just am a dick. No, I think it's an interesting question. I don't know. I have seen all sides of the spectrum, where I've seen some introverts that are just like, this is great, this is what I'm doing anyway, and I've seen a lot of extroverts, either flourishing because, as you said, that they really know that connection is necessary, and I've also seen extroverts really just going insane.
I think it kind of could come down to who's more technologically savvy.
Yep.
Like I am not super technologically savvy, but my boyfriend is. So we often do things with my friends via Zoom and Skype because he suggests it and I love it, but I would never suggest it because I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of our people our age or our generation have access to a lot of ways to connect online, video calls and things like that.
I wanted to ask Jamie, being a sexual type in a one is not a. Often, I think people feel those might be conflicting energies, and just for the listeners in the house, in Enneagram theory, there is, in my opinion, a lot of bullshit about sexual ones. Like Naranjo, who is one of the early, he was the student of Echazo being the guy who kind of made the modern Enneagram. Naranjo did a lot to try to modernize and apply psychology to Echazo's fairly mystical system, philosopher of the universe system. And in so doing, he came up with these combinations of type and instincts that were not actually based on instinctual drives as biological drives. They were based on this whole obscure Gurdjieff concept of subdivision of centers. But what ended up happening is that it resulted in a widespread teaching of what are called subtypes, and people mistake these for instincts all the time. And so my memory serves, the sexual one is often described as like intensely jealous and like a zealot and all this kind of exaggerated blah blah blah. But one of the contributions that those of us here on this pod race have been bringing forward is the view of instincts as biological drives, and clarifying that sexual is often taught as like one-on-one intimacy or connection, which it's not. Social is, and social just has a very flexible lens. Sexual instinct is about attraction, being attracted and attracting. It's about pursuing chemistry and needing that hit of chemistry with somebody. And so for some people, I think it can be difficult to put the kind of caricature of one and, striving for perfection, and then the sexual instinct, which has a kind of chaotic element to it. So I was wondering if you could, I know that you're not like deep dive in Enneagram, but if you could elaborate on some how those things come together for you.
Yeah, I wish, Emma, if you have that collage handy, like I feel like a visual would just.
Yeah. I'll end up sending those to you guys, but the visual of her collage very much speaks to, and of course my experience of Jamie. One of the most fascinating things about her to me is that I could see that she was somewhat of I describe her sometimes as uppity personality that was really wanting to be on top of her shit. And, she calls her fashion brand production mode. But at the same time, there was this really loose creativity that she had. I mean, even the night that we met that she was DJing, she was getting out there and she was just, cutting it up to Prince and everything. And so the contrast of those two things, if this is someone who can really get in there with you in terms of locking in energetically and can go with, really creative and out there things, but at the same time has really high standards for, just real high standards for aesthetics and high standards for just a lot of things. And so that combination was really interesting to me, of order and chaos together.
Yeah, I guess maybe one way that it would present itself in a way that makes sense to me is kind of, sometimes I'm attracted to extremes or singularity. I think there's a real desire to not be bored. But I'm not I'm not particularly wild. Like I have not super experimental with drugs, but maybe I will want to hear about someone's experience who has been, or I'll be attracted to that experience and that knowledge. So I think there's something where like there's definitely in the extremes or in the really singular experiences or people in the world, there's always going to be, or there usually is some kind of mess or mystery. But there's also something, if you use the word singular, it may not be an ideal, but it's certainly, or extreme, it's the end point or the avant-garde, or does that make sense?
Yeah, and so how does that factor in with the way you present yourself as attractive? Like, like how do you attract? We often use the term like display. Like, what is your hooks or your display as a one? How do you like be like, I'm an interesting person and come get it?
Oh yeah, I think I would describe myself as like a very particular flavor, but people who like that flavor like it a lot. So like I'm not going for the higher market. I'm not like, here's your vanilla ice cream. It's palpable. It's going to sell well, but there's just nothing particularly special or interesting about it. I'm like, oh, let me pull you over here. This is going to be something that you're going to go very deep into. This is going to be super compelling and interesting, but it's not for everybody. And also, I don't care about what all the rest of you think. So there's something that can be really compelling to a certain segment of the population about that.
I love that you're saying that because, given that you don't have like a whole big long background in the Enneagram, you're totally nailing the sexual instinct, because part of what the sexual instinct is about is attraction, but it's attraction based on specificity. It's not being generically like you said, it's not being vanilla and pleasing. It's like you're gonna want to crave it, or you're really gonna be repelled by it. So I think that's great that you touched on that.
Would you say that your music and your fashion is a way that you attract people?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a cachet and being, involved in the art. People think that's interesting, like when you go back to Thanksgiving dinner, your family's like, wow, that's so cool. But I mean, I don't actually do it for those reasons. I actually think it's boring when people think that's cool. That sounds totally like an asshole thing to say, but it's the truth.
Yeah, but it's like the displays, like we're instinctual creatures, and our instinctual displays are unconscious. Like I'm not like I paint, and I'm not like painting because I'm like, some chick is gonna want to bang me for this. But when I paint, it's like, but it is like just a byproduct, and I have this compulsion to produce, like, to reference actual, like, like what anthropologists and blah 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 talk about. It's like these things are actually human display mechanisms, right? And we just do them automatically, and we feel maybe like a burning energy around them, but it's not like we're like cognizant of what result this is going to be. It like feels like it's pursuing beauty or passion or something like that, but it's got a whole biological utility. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. And I'm going to kind of take that in a slightly different direction. I would say that, again, remembering that I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment, it's like I grew up 2 generations ago. And so I would say part of it too was wanting to be related with people who are maybe iconoclast or questioning things or interesting. And also growing up, anything interesting that happened was a man's world. So I think even something like DJing is still very much a man's world. Fashion design, not so much. But kind of being involved in the arts and doing things and being in charge of things, I think that was always very compelling to me as a woman in a repressive environment. Not so much, I think, out of feminism, which I mean I definitely identify with, but more so to be around other creative people of whatever gender. Like that display, it's not just display, it's also to put myself in a position where I'm going to be around other interesting people. Like the worst thing I could think of was just be like talking about the Cubs, like I could just stop there, I guess. Like our condo associations,
Oh yeah. I'm getting excited. Cloud is back. Mary's back.
Mary's back.
I hope it works for real. I'm sorry. If anyone needs me to talk about one frustration and anger at this moment, I can like really.
Yeah, what's coming up for you right now, Mary? Yeah, I'd actually love to hear that. That sounds.
Let's process together.
I mean, just like it's all. Oh my God, can you not hear me?
No,
We
we
can
can
hear
hear
No,
you.
we can hear you.
Okay.
we
Oh
can
my God.
There it is.
That's how we'll fuck with Mary the rest of this call.
Oh no.
It's just like all like I cannot even explain to you a reason why I feel this much like inward heat and like just so much anger right now. Like I can't even. It's not explainable. It's all like on a physical level. That is,
Yeah.
and that's usually how like anger and frustration like presents itself for me.
Well, and the thing about Mary too, though, you can stay like light and happy on the outside.
Yes.
Pretty well.
That's very true. Yeah. Go ahead.
When you get
Nine-wing
angry,
there.
what does it sound like? Like, what's
It
what's
sounds like this. Like it sounds, it sounds like this to everyone, but like maybe my family and my husband. Then for them, it sounds like yelling, like loud yelling. Yeah.
Another interesting thing about Mary is that she and her she grew up with the Enneagram.
Right.
Wow.
I know sometimes I feel like I can't explain stuff as well because it's always been sort of like instinctual for me, like how I decide like, oh, this person is a 4, this person is a 9 or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Since childhood, she's been fluent.
My parents like typed me in my like crib. they were like because apparently at one point I was like it wasn't like the baby crib, but it was like the toddler like playpen thing, and I was like I like lined up all my shoes like in order, and then my dad told me that I had to like put them away, and I like had a meltdown. So I had just like lined them up all like how I wanted them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Jamie and Mary, you guys are both social blind.
Yes.
And I was wondering if like I think a lot of I keep referring to stereotype just because I think sometimes the stereotype around one is very entrenched, and also because ones are actually pretty rare.
Yes.
And so it's easier for people, just like any type, but it's easy for people to remember like an exaggerated Hollywood version. Like you might see in a caricature in a comedy movie or something that like like I said, the librarian earlier. So I think a lot of people's first, second, and third impressions about ones generally is like with a one with more social instinct. And so also like even if a one is like a self-pres social one, generally there's still kind of like a classic archetypal sense of one where I'm very ordered, and I don't know, there is more emphasis on utility, and so both of your stackings are some of the most impractical stackings, right?
I would definitely phrase it that way for sure.
And they rub themselves the wrong way.
Yeah, and so with this one order making kind of quality, like how do you experience yourselves as social blind and in conflict with the one energy?
I would just say that one always was hard for me. I feel like I'm a socially adept person, and that my social skills have served me well. So I kind of never understood the concept of being socially blind. So I think maybe Emeka could weigh in more about how I'm socially blind.
Yeah. I think I remember now that when we talked about it back then, you didn't see yourself and you didn't necessarily feel that you were deficient in social. And I think what I tried to explain is I'm an assertive type as well, and I can be out there and involved with people. And I too had a difficulty recognizing how I could be social blind. But it's kind of speaking to what you were saying before, that you'd end up at a party, you talk to people, a couple of people in depth, and you got a lot of energy from being around people, but the sort of lens of your attention was very narrowly focused to certain people, whereas social types have kind of an idea of how other people are viewing them and how they're connecting to other people, the different degrees of connection to other people. So a lot of social types are invested a lot in building and maintaining different kinds of connections.
A complex social map.
Yes.
And like a social type might at a party make sure to have a certain kind of interaction with the host, right?
Well,
Or
yeah.
I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z relative to these certain kinds of people in the group or something, and sensing a hierarchy rather than going nosediving in with individuals.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to y'all's podcast about with the ape.
Oh, okay.
And I
Mary's
one of the
God
apes-
sisters with
yeah,
Sienna.
Sienna's
Okay.
an ape, and yeah. And someone said the phrase scanning, like when you go into a party and you scan the room. I was like, what is this scanning the room you speak of?
What's this strange?
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, like I totally relate to the like I only this year have I even like really connected with the fact that that's a thing that maybe I should do. And only because I've had to because of my job. Like this is the first year I've been a full-time opera singer, and you have to do it so much at like donor events and stuff like that. And so like this year I've really sort of realized how much I am social last. Like that element, and then like also the whole element of people expect you to like talk to certain people in a different way. Like you have to like cater the way you speak to different people, and that to me is just like physically excruciating. Yeah.
I'm
like,
over here like that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Jamie, do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, totally. And I was just thinking about how one big part of my job is because I'm an independent designer, I don't have a salesperson. I have to do all these sales events. And if it's a huge market, for example, like we have a show here in Chicago where 70,000 people who come through over the course of 4 days, and it just drains me. Like I'm just dead when I come home. And I was shocked when I started doing this that didn't give me energy. I was like, wait, I'm a social person. I'm so social. And I was like, oh my God, I hate everybody. I never want to talk to anyone ever again. And definitely that thing of like, you have to send someone a thank you note and you're supposed to bring a host gift, like all that stuff.
There it is. There it is. Social. That's social right there.
Okay. Well, I personally hate that
Yeah.
stuff.
So I am okay. That huge blind spot. I own it now.
Yeah. And I also find that even if I go to like I have a good social interaction, like I go to a party and I've like had a good time, like when I'm like driving home or whatever, it's like I have like a hangover immediately, like a social hangover. And it's like I have to like calm down with like I have to find something to calm me down, sort of.
And I don't have that, but I think it's because of the sexual first in that, you know, I managed to myself into a corner with someone and go deep, and then I'm like, that's so good.
Yeah, I mean, Mary's pretty introverted too.
Yeah, and I'm also very introverted, right?
So that kind of reminded me of some ones I know in my life that I've talked to tend to have like a lot of self-judgment. So I've heard a lot of ones like when they leave social interactions will be kind of like, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that. And that's a very social kind of thing. But there's a lot of self-judgment around the social and self-pres in the ones that I know. Do either of you have kind of self-judgment in this sexual or self-pres way?
I would say I used to analyze everything all the time, especially myself. And as I've gotten older, just been more like, fuck it, who cares? You know, just let it go. You know, you just got to be you. But I would say too, I don't know if this is related to the stackings at all, but I think I'm very good usually at reading people's body language and knowing if I'm landing or not. You know, like, do they like me? Like, so I used to be definitely a people pleaser too as a result, and pretty good at kind of, you know, reading people's cues or they're having a little like a psychic connection with people. And I've actually tried to turn that off as I've gotten older because I'm like, that is just noise in my brain that I don't need. I don't want to know what you're thinking, or like, you know, just fucking tell me. Like, why do I have to figure it out for you? So that's something I don't know, because I don't know the Enneagram, if that makes me more of a 1 or more sexual or what, but
Well, I think it's a body center
Yeah.
orientation, because we've had calls with 9s, 8s, and it was interesting how each of those types said something about how they were able to physically sense into other people, and 9s are sort of absorbing other people unconsciously and not being able to, like, very sensitively, and 8s are sort of are able to, at least some of the 8s that were on that call, where I can sense what someone is thinking or what they might be wanting to do through the body. So it's interesting to hear you say how you could read people through the body, um, whether if you were landing or not with that person.
Just I relate to that as well.
yeah. Okay.
The like I feel like I do, like I agree. I can sense, like you said, where I'm landing with someone,
Mhm.
and but I am also not exempt from what Nancy was saying about, like, I definitely do kind of like go over everything that just happened in my head. Even though I am social acid, I do have that. But I mean, that to me, that feels a little bit more like the like one judgment thing,
Yeah.
of like, how did I perform, sort of.
Totally.
And maybe some 6 fix insecurity.
Yeah.
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 So, like, we're talking about the body and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think is not very well understood about one as a body type is that, the body types 891 are different strategies of maintaining ego boundaries and autonomy, right? Like, 8, it's like, I'm going to not be affected by things. I'm going to declare my sort of autonomy and sovereignty by pushing against the environment and kind of amping things up. With 9, it's like, I'm going to kind of space out a little bit and going to maybe go along to get along and keep things smooth. For the 1, the way I control boundaries is primarily directed towards myself rather than the environment, meaning, inner criticism and trying to make sure that my inside doesn't reveal something bad about me or flawed, and making sure that, like, my inner life is good, is consistent, and that extends to my outer life. But judgment is a big type 1 buzzword, keyword, strategy, whatever. And part of the psychological function of judgment is that it's a way to be, on one hand, connected to something, on the other hand, keep your distance from it. And so what I mean, like, take like eating right, for example, like eating, like, I only eat organic food or some shit like that. It's like, if I'm all critical and judgy about what food I'm eating, it's like I'm very controlled about what comes into my body and into my boundaries and what doesn't go in. And it allows me to maintain a certain kind of purity in this case, a self-pres kind of way. So I was wondering if y'all could speak to the way judgment and autonomy, and even getting into anger and things like that, how that operates for y'all.
Yeah, especially what you said about maintaining sort of the, like, and I guess having like your sort of inner life and like your body under control, sort of,
hmm
and like being able to, and having control over like how you display that to other people. I think actually that that's part of like how I maintain the inner order, is
hmm
like keeping it safe from other people, sort of. I don't know if that's like self-prezi, like kind of what you were just saying, what you mentioned about the anger thing, is that like only 5 people have ever like really like know what I am like when I'm like really angry, because I'm able to like sort of cater like how that comes across. I want to have control over how it is expressed like in the outside world, and then that's how I sort of like feel, I guess, like safe, or like that's how I relate to feeling things in my body, I guess.
An aesthetic of control, self-control.
Yeah.
For me, I would say I definitely struggle when other people criticize me or judge me. It is, I think, my biggest fault. I do not take it well. And I think it's not so much that I think I'm perfect. I don't think it's arrogance. I think it's that I judge myself so harshly internally. And I feel like I've already done, like I'm doing my best. So yeah, that was really hard for other people to understand, like, I just asked you to do the dishes. And I'm like, God damn it,
Yeah.
I'm working
Yeah.
really hard over here.
It's like you've already judged yourself, so you don't need someone else to judge you for you.
Yeah, which is completely unfair to the people around you. But
It's not fair.
Oh, I know.
Really need to stop.
That's a judgment of the judgment.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Don't listen to them. It's your experience. You're allowed to have it.
I can handle it. Yeah.
I feel like I'll criticize like the way my husband does like one thing, and he'll get like very offended by it. And in my head, I'm like, you don't know how many things I have already held back on. Like how many things I have not said that I have wanted to say so bad. And I also relate to what you were saying, Jamie, about like, think I've grown better at taking criticism because that is like literally my entire career. I mean, that's a lot of people's careers, but like people will continuously say it to my face as a performer. And so I've gotten a little bit better, but I do definitely relate to like, I've already told myself this so many times that then hearing it from somebody else is like the last straw.
Yeah, it's almost like we just need to be supported and
Yes.
like allowed to chill out and be free, be yourself. Because
Right.
we're struggling with that so much. We don't need more voices in our head being like, well, you need to work on that. Like,
Yeah.
no, we need to just like let it go.
On the
So
other hand, I do like really, sometimes I like want people to criticize me because I want to know that it's not all in my head. Like I want my inner critic to be like verified. And so I'm like,
That sounds almost like Six Fix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh yeah, there you go. So yeah, I sometimes, if I only get positive feedback, I don't trust any of the positive
Then we know
feedback.
it's bullshit.
Yeah,
We want
exactly.
we want authenticity too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thanks y'all for being on here. You did a sufficient job.
Very
No,
productive.
you're telling the truth. I think.
Very productive. Well, except for
You
Mary.
did an okay
I know.
job.
Except for Mary, who ruined everything.
Just truly a shit show.
Could have done
for
better.
sure.
It's like a B minus, right?
It does.
Maybe a C
No,
plus.
you guys, it was an F. Be honest.
Oh,
Oh, it was great.
F
It
in
was
your
actually
head.
great.
Yeah, it was good.
We embrace our little imperfect friends.
What the
I
Enneagram's
suppose.
about, guys.
Yeah.
No, really appreciate you guys being here because I think it was a really deep and unconventional look at like what's really going on for ones, and it's just not the fucking dumb shit you see on Instagram memes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie, for agreeing to come on
Yeah,
this
thank you.
podcast with
thanks.
us.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
Y'all.
Dealing
Thank
with
you.
Emika again.
Yeah,
dealing
gosh,
with
that
me
must
after
be
so many
terrible.
years.
And thank you, Mary, for persisting on against the Wi-Fi.
Yes. Anytime.
Bye, guys.
All right,
Jamie.
bye. Thanks, guys.